welcome to At the Forefront Fintech Conversations. I'm Sam Belden, head of content at Forefront Communications, and with me today is Jake Claver. Jake is managing director at Digital Ascension Group. Jake, welcome.
Hey, appreciate you having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Digital Ascension Group is a specialized multifamily office with a focus on working with private clients, also other family offices to navigate challenges, opportunities in the digital asset space. So, today we're going to talk about some of those complexities and opportunities, some of the adoption trends that Jake is seeing, and some strategies for maximizing the value of a digital portfolio. So, we'll get to all that. But Jake, I guess starting at the beginning of the story, one thing I've seen your company talk a lot about is sort of bridging the traditional service and traditional finance with the digital asset ecosystem. So, can you tell me a little bit about what that looks like, particularly when it comes to your audience, your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a couple different things. We are, like you said, we work with a few family offices. We consult for them, and specifically on their digital asset or whatever allocation they have to that space. We provide all the services around that. So it could be CPAs, accountants, the wealth management. We have an SEC registered RIA, and that's probably the biggest piece or the change that I think is the most progressive of what we provide in comparison to others. So we partner with Anchorage. We provide institutional grade custody for digital assets, and all of our clients, have some allocation there. We do a lot of proactive work, so we're working with people that have anywhere north of 500,000 to 5 million in digital assets. Help them structure their estate and plan for the liquidity event that we see on the horizon here. Um, so yeah, that's kind of a basic high level of the services that we provide.
Awesome. Makes sense. Maybe you could give our audience a little bit of background on sort of the appetite that you see for services like yours among your target audience. I was reading a report recently from I believe Goldman that said 32% of family offices have ventured into crypto, which is double what it was a few years ago. Still feels relatively low, certainly compared to other asset classes, compared to the media attention and just the conversations that are happening right now around digital assets. So tell us what you're seeing on adoption. Do you think we're starting to reach that inflection point? What do you see there?
Yeah. So to your point, most family offices are looking for wealth preservation rather than, exponential gains. Most of the conversation that we have when we're working with the family office is, these are asymmetric bets. It is risky. It's highly speculative. We think that we can pick winners just because we understand what the space looks like and where it's going. But you still want some diversification and maybe just a small allocation or a portion of your portfolio would be ideal. Most of the time we see somewhere between 0.5% and 5% of family offices portfolio allocated to digital assets if they have any exposure at all. We put on a conference at the end of last year in September where we had close to 500 billion in the room between the family offices that attended, just to educate them on the space, who the institutional partners are, what best practices are, how to mitigate the risks associated with crypto. And we've got another one of those here in April that we're putting on. Hopefully, somewhere close to 300 to 400 people will attend that one,
Nice.
and maybe similar AUM in the room. But yeah, I see the appetite increasing, especially now that we see some bipartisan agreement that there needs to be regulation in the space, and we've seen the new administration move in. I think that this year is going to be the inflection point, as you mentioned, for a lot of mainstream and family offices or high net worth individuals dipping their toe in the water or feeling comfortable enough to move that direction.
Awesome. And good to hear that anecdotally you've sort of started to see that momentum. You're getting a bit more of a critical mass around attending events and just sort of actively engaging in the progress that we're seeing here. To your point, there is sort of that emerging bipartisan consensus, and it does seem like there's going to be some regulatory clarity coming down the pike. So I guess, speaking of that, at the time that we're having this discussion, the creation of Bitcoin reserves in the public sphere is something that is getting a lot of attention at the state level. There's talk about the SEC taking a really close look at that. Curious if you see any parallels, differences in terms of the journey towards using crypto as a store of value for in the private sphere, families versus in the public sphere for taxpayers, citizens. Anything there?
I still think that we're pretty early on in the actual adoption of this asset class, and there's still a lot of volatility. I mean, we've seen, just 20-25% down to the
Yeah,
downside
that's right.
in the last few days here on Bitcoin, moving from over 100,000, now sub 80 this morning. So I um I probably take a different perspective than the majority of your audience and many other people that you talk with on digital assets. I think that there's going to be a few specific networks that end up winning out that are not Bitcoin and Ethereum, that'll have substantial increases in value and likely much more stable value over the long term, that I think would be much better suited for holding in a sovereign reserve or in a family office's portfolio. Um, so yeah, I don't know that that's going to be Bitcoin. I know that that's been the main topic or coin discussed when people think through that. Trump talked about it last year when he went to the Bitcoin conference, and most people, that's what they read when they see crypto reserve. They just assume it would be Bitcoin because it is the leader in the space. But I think personally, I view Bitcoin as kind of like the Napster of um,
Interesting.
crypto. First mover advantage, definitely disrupted a market, but I think that there's a potential that it could get regulated out. Um, and I think that the other winners could be chosen. So,
It makes sense. I mean, certainly some Bitcoin maximalists in our audience here. Others who do feel differently. So, no, I appreciate the perspective. And when you talk about, obviously in your position in the family office space, it is a different audience than sort of the obviously the quintessential crypto investor that you think about. So, appreciate your thoughts there. You talked about creating that long term value. You talked about picking winners. Tell me, in your eyes, when it comes to maximizing the value of a digital asset portfolio and doing this in a way that works for these high net worth families. What strategies are key? What would you tell a high net worth family that's thinking about getting into this and has questions about what that looks like for them? What do you think?
so we partner with sub advisors and provide some market neutral strategies for people that want an allocation of the asset class with proven returns. But I do think that we like to kind of pick your cake and eat it too, right? So a lot of our clients have an allocation to specific assets that they believe will go up and to the right in the long term, and then we work with the sub advisors to issue a line of credit against that they trade in their strategy that's market neutral. So that's the way we're able to generate cash returns while still being leveraged to the upside or getting that exposure for our clients. And then obviously options is a great way to be able to mitigate risk to the downside. So buying options on the ETF to the downside to be able to, capitalize on the downward moves in the
Right.
market. IBIT, introduced those for the ETF at the end of last year, and unfortunately, I think the majority of the institutions took the long side of that bet at the top. Hopefully, they hedged a little bit again with recent market action. That's what I thought they were going to do. They're like, okay, cool. Now we have a way to be able to mitigate risk to the downside and make sure that if there are losses, we're covered. So just thinking through things, there aren't as many um, options, for lack of a better term, against um, to not just be long in the space. Um, but I think that will change again with regulation moving in and more institutional players moving into the space. Futures, perps, options. There's a lot of ways that you can mitigate risk while still getting the potential upside here, and so that's a lot of what we work with our clients on.
Great. Appreciate that summary. It definitely does feel like, we are seeing more institutions get into the space. I think with that will come a lot more flexibility when it comes to the type of transactions that you're making, how you're going to engage with this sort of emerging asset class. So all makes sense and aligns with, I think, what we're seeing. Awesome. Any other trends that you see as particularly exciting, whether having to do with digital assets or maybe outside of that, but when it comes to innovating family offices and the opportunities available, anything that you see emerging there?
Yeah, so we partner with iPaladin. I don't know if you guys are familiar with them or not,
Sure.
but they provide a blockchain solution for the management of all of the documentation in your family office and coordination between the different professionals that you might be working with. Um, really enjoy Jill and her team down there in Florida. Um, I think that they're super progressive in what they put forth, and I think now that there's going to be a lot of wealth that's going to move from boomers to Gen X and um, the millennials over the next 10 years here. and the people that we're working with in that space tend to be a bit more accepting of this technology and progressive when it comes to that. Um, but while the wealth is still held by the majority of boomers, I think that they're a bit hesitant to, even make an allocation here or look at the technology itself. Again, once you've made your wealth, you're looking at wealth preservation and, at least keeping up with inflation and generating some real returns on your portfolio, but you're not looking for, 5, 10, 100x on your assets.
Yeah.
Now, again, a small portion of your portfolio might be allocated to that, and it's probably going to be in the sector that you cut your teeth in. However, you made your money as a family office is where most people keep their wealth and continue to invest. But yeah, I think the actual application of this technology in different verticals will streamline processes and systems and remove frictions in financial transactions. And a lot of people just aren't aware of the benefits that it's going to provide yet. But and they won't even be when it happens. They'll just be like, "Wow, that transaction was a lot faster and easier than it used to be." Similar to the internet and how it changed things as people moved on to the internet with email and other benefits that's provided. I think that'll be a similar deal for the internet of value and what this asset class does for that.
Awesome. That all makes sense. It's funny you mentioned the great wealth transfer. A few months ago, I had a guest on the podcast, a fintech by the name of Ribbon, and they sell to credit unions. So very different audience from you, but they sell to credit unions so that they have technology tools to help their clients through the inheritance process, make that transfer of wealth as smooth and streamlined as it can be, which aligns, I think, generally with some of the things that you were saying. Thinking more philosophically, I guess, when you think of the role of fintech and technology when it comes to building a sustainable financial legacy, obviously that's of interest to your audience. What do you see as the role that technology can play there, and anything that firms should sort of work towards in their long-term roadmap as far as making sure that they're aligned with that long-term value?
Yeah. So I, I don't know if you've had many people talk about DAOs or decentralized autonomous organizations
Mm.
on your show. Um, but I think that that's going to be a new form of governance for just how things work within an ecosystem or a business and how the treasury management happens. Obviously, that's still very early stages, but Wyoming's very progressive with the regulation around that. You've got a few other states like Florida and Texas that are looking at that as well. I don't know if it'll end up being a nonprofit or a for-profit or how they'll structure it, but building in systems that allow people to make better decisions that are transparent and um, for family offices in particular, a matriarch or patriarch that has developed, you know, a doctrine that they want to put forth. They've got their mission statement, core values, and principles for how they want the family to act over the next 100 years in order to maintain, cultivate the wealth, and give that back to whatever their community is or make an impact with it. If you're able to structure the way things have to happen, even beyond your demise, it'd be really attractive. And so I think DAOs are going to play a substantial role in the way people manage their wealth and their businesses moving forward. And if you haven't looked into that, if it's something that's not been on your radar and you're a fintech company, I think it's definitely something worth looking at.
Awesome. That's a great insight. We haven't discussed that topic very much on the podcast to date, so appreciate your perspective there. To your earlier point, it's all very early days for this stuff. We're seeing pretty dramatic price swings. The institutional adoption is not where it's going to be in 5, 10 years, and even beyond that. But it's really interesting to hear how all sorts of different firms and audience types in the space are starting to engage with digital assets a bit more, and interesting to hear the family office perspective on that, because that's not one that we've had on before. So appreciate all of that, Jake. Want to thank you for your time today. If you'd like to learn more about Jake and the work that his company does, you can head over to digitalfamilyoffice.io. And for an archive of episodes of At the Forefront, head over to forefrontcoms.com and head over to the news and insights section. Jake, thank you again for coming on.
Absolutely, brother. Thank you for having me.